Meanwhile, a projected revenue increase is still not enough for Transnet's escalating capital and operational expenditure requirements. But the rail, port and pipeline company is adopting a multi-source funding strategy, leveraging various mechanisms to secure the necessary capital. Amongst these, are landmark LNG agreements set to boost the Richards Bay port's capacity for liquid bulk handling. Jan Havenga, Logistics Emeritus Professor at Industrial Engineering for Stellenbosch University, joins us now with his perspective on Transnet. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. Now, there has been a clapping of hands for strides made in logistics reform. How much ground have we covered in greener pastures?
I think in the last 2 years, we've made a lot of progress. We have to admit to that. I say that because many of us, including myself, often gets very impatient because of the lot of things that we still need to do. And sadly, I have to say there's a lot of the things that we should have done over the last 2 years that we didn't do. We covered a lot of ground. We have new leadership at Transnet. The new leadership at Transnet is much more open, hardworking, dedicated. They're really trying to save Transnet as an entity. And they're doing good work as far as that is concerned. There has been a turnaround of the rail volumes, not as much as the Minister of Transport would have liked it and the President would have liked, and I can say why. There's good reason, because nobody's really invested in a network yet. So Transnet's turnaround plan, people often refer to it, but they forget that Transnet turnaround plan had a premise of a capital injection in the plan, which never came, and Treasury, for very good reasons, never gave. And we understand that. So there's a lot of hard work has been done, and I can understand that. But the problem is still Transnet in its current form. That is the core of the problem, if you think about that. If you think about it, Transnet is not SAA. It's not a single business that, SAA is an airline. Do we need SAA? If I tell you tomorrow we're going to close down SAA, what effect is going to have on South Africa? If we close the NEL tomorrow, what effect will it have on South Africa, except a few people losing their jobs? If I tell you tomorrow that we will not have rail infrastructure anymore after all of the work that we've done to have open access for private operators, if I tell you tomorrow our port authority will stop working and our ships will be landing anymore, if I tell you tomorrow there's going to be no big container terminal at Key 4 in Durban, and I can mention 40 things like that, which is critical to our country and critical to our survival. So Transnet is not equal to just another SOE that needs to be bailed out. But the problem is also in what I just described. On the one hand, there's these public goods portfolio businesses. If you think about the rail track or you think about the port authority, that is 100% comparable to Sunrail. Now, if the Minister of Finance says tough love and, that people must get by with themselves, what would he say if Sunrail comes tomorrow and he says that they've got no more money and they can't fix the roads?
Well, let's actually talk about that, because in a lot of assessments for the budget and economic prospects, of course, there's, the Transnet's need for financial support, saying that could be a risk. You talk about capital injection, cash injection being the premise of the turnaround plan. What is the bigger risk, for Treasury to take on that financial support or to refuse to carry that weight? And maybe could there be a tough love approach where Treasury is willing to give the love and support, but maybe on stricter conditions?
I can't do better than 100% agree with what the Director General of the Treasury said about 18 months ago. I heard him say it in conversations, but later on it became quite apparent that he says. And that is, there will be no general balance sheet relief for Transnet. And he cannot be more correct, because what we do here, we have all of these things that I've mentioned that is important to this country, and put them on one side. On the other side, there's this conglomerate with this massive debt. So whenever you get involved with Transnet, you get involved with Transnet's debt. You get involved with this whole thing. If you were to do one magic thing and just unbundle the whole business, if all of these, let's say there was, I used an extreme example, let's say there was 40 smaller different businesses. Each one of those businesses will have the people assigned to it that it's needed, the assets that is needed. Each one of them will have the debt assigned to it that is associated with whatever has been bought for that little unit. And then you can deal with it, the private sector, and then those businesses that I've just described, that group of 40. It's, as I say, it's a bit extreme, but it's a group of 40. Some of them will be private sector type businesses, like the rail operating company, like the terminals, etc. And they can be either privatized or they can go into PSPs. They can do all sorts of things like that. Some of them, like the Port Authority and like the rail track, the infrastructure portion that is just like SANRAL, just becomes a government responsibility, the same as SANRAL, the same as AXA, the same as any one of these entities. The country needs it, government needs to invest in it, and the only way in which the private sector gets involved there is like with SANRAL, with concessions for infrastructure maintenance. If you break it up like that, it actually solves the whole problem. If you add it all together in one big pot, and on the other side of it, you have this big, huge debt. And if you pay off this debt, what have you actually achieved? You still sit with this completely convoluted thing on the other side. And therefore, I think the DG of Treasury was correct when he says, I will fund specific projects. I will talk about specific projects. He uses the words off-balance sheet funding. But I don't want to put money directly into that general balance sheet of Transnet. Now, that means we will have to analyze this business and do a portfolio analysis and unbundle the business in its various pieces. Now, I've used the word unbundling recently often, but there's a history to it. It was the plan when Transnet was created to unbundle it. In 1990, when we created Transnet, and I was young, I had a small role in the team that actually created Transnet. I worked for Transnet at that time. I'm not senior, but I was there and I heard everything. And the idea was always, once we've created Transnet, which was basically a government department that then had legal succession, the idea was, let's first put it all together, because that is all part of what was used to be called the South African Railway Harbour and Harbours Administration. Then let's streamline it, let's put things there where it's required, let's unbundle it, let's put pieces in the private sector where it belongs. You know, when Transnet was created, the Ministry of Public Enterprises had a different name. It was called the Ministry of Privatization. The minister was actually the Minister of Privatization that we reported to. So the idea was always to unbundle it. And if you talk to successive chief executives of Transnet all the way through, and you listen to what they've actually been told, it was always that the business should be unbundled. It's not a foreign concept. But strangely enough, in the last 2 years, we've not done the financial structuring work that is required to prepare Transnet for this unbundling. And even now, when I listen to the management of Transnet, they are trying to save Transnet in its current form. Somebody asked me the other day if I thought the chief executive of Transnet is as good as people say. And I said, yes, I like her. She works hard. She's trying, but say maybe she shouldn't have been so good. She's working very hard to trace Transnet. And I think we need to unbundle Transnet, sadly.
Such an interesting perspective, because I mean, really the focus has been on how we get the private sector to be involved in that. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how far the tentacles of the private sector reach into Transnet's ecosystem and operations. But the unbundling idea, hopefully we can maybe see movement in that at some point. I don't know, maybe in its current form, but we're also looking to the budget to see if there is any support provided by Treasury. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. That was Jan Havenga, Logistics Emeritus Professor at Industrial Engineering for Stellenbosch University.